for Memorial Day weekend was a lot tougher than I thought. I know that's probably I know it's probably irrelevant to you listening, but just want to let you know how hard I worked to get the shows lined up for this week. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. What a weekend. I hope you guys are enjoying this weekend. I was still thinking about my trip last weekend to the Olympic Project, hanging out with the people from the Olympic Project, and actually doing an expedition out there in the Olympics. And one of the presenters, his name's Tom Baker. He's actually an ex-Top Gun instructor, and the guy is really into data. And I was listening to some of the different presentations they were giving. And, you know, if you've ever been to a conference, sometimes the presentations can be kind of dry. You know, you lose interest after a while. But this was very, very fascinating. And as soon as he said it was going to be on data collection, I was ready to take a nap. But when the presentation started, it's hands down one of the presentations that I was very, very, very impressed by. And it was really interesting. You know, a lot of times people talk about Sasquatch jumping into portals. They talk about Sasquatch having special powers. And this was very interesting because what they showed was in Washington State, he had this kind of a graph presentation and little pictures of Sasquatch where everyone's had an encounter, where encounters were reported. And this was a very small portion of the presentation. But what was interesting as I'm sitting there watching this, and he's showing all the different encounters throughout the state of Washington, he goes, I want to show you something. And so he pulls up, I think it was the year 2009, between 2009 and 2011. And he showed all of the encounters in Washington State between this time frame. And what was interesting is there was almost no encounters on the east side of the state. And on the west side of the state, the encounters like doubled. And he was asking the audience, what do you think has caused this? Why would there be no encounters on this side of the state? And why would all the encounters almost double on the west side of the state? And what was interesting is I want to show you something. And he flips up the thing and he shows where there is forest fires throughout the state. And they were all on the east side of the state. For those of you unfamiliar with Washington, the east side of the state is actually very dry. There's some actual desert areas. It's kind of a high desert. There's some very, very dry areas, unlike the west side of the state. But it was fascinating because he showed all of these forest fires, and there was almost no encounters reported on the east side of the state. However, on the west side of the state, they had almost doubled. And so it was very fascinating to listen to him give this data analysis of encounters and what time of year people are reporting encounters, where they're reporting encounters, the time of day. And he was kind of narrowing it down to specific locations, almost trying to create a redundancy, almost trying to create predictability of where these creatures are going to be at. And it was just fascinating to watch. Again, I was very impressed with the Olympic Project. I was impressed with the expedition and their presentations, and had a great time. I hope you guys are having a great time this weekend, and I hope you're getting a chance to get out there, enjoy the wilderness, but be alert, be smart while you're out there. My first guest tonight is Jared. He's actually from Southern California. He had a very, very close-up personal encounter with one of these things. Almost got too close. But it was very interesting to listen to the creature's behavior. Jared, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And if you would, you had a very interesting encounter, kind of a terrifying encounter, really. I think for most people, they wish for this type of encounter, but when it happens, it's a whole different ballgame. If you would, kind of start from the beginning. Tell us exactly what happened.
I could tell anybody and everybody that would wish for this encounter that it's not something that you would ever want to be as close as I was. I can understand a road crossing. I can understand seeing one at a good distance, but as close as I was, my life flashed before my eyes faster. Everything in my body told me to go, don't move. This thing very well could pull you apart in a million pieces. Basically, a little background. My parents own a property out in Temecula, California. It's on about 5 acres. my dad for a few months. They'd been there for about a year when this incident kind of took place. My dad had been telling me, I think somebody's coming on the property. And I was like, oh, well, it's kind of a weird thing. He's got neighbors. Most of his neighbors are about 150, 250 yards from, in any direction where he is. So with the exception of where this happened, we'd gone down there. It was late December, so it was dark by the time my wife and my daughter and I had gotten down there. My wife got out of the car and heard something hiss at her. And I just figured, there's bobcats, there's mountain lions, there's all kinds of fun stuff down there. So it wasn't that big of a deal. She was like, honey, something hissed at me. I was like, let's just go inside. It's not a big deal. It's dark, whatever. Whatever just hissed at you is probably more scared of you than you are of it. So we went inside, kind of visited for a little bit with my parents and, talked to my dad, all this stuff. My dad was telling me, he put this alarm up, and this alarm just kept going off and going off and going off. And every time he'd go outside, he didn't see anything. So I was like, that's probably, coyotes or a rabbit or, something of that nature. And I told my wife, we had brought a puppy down there, a new puppy. At the time, he was about 60 pounds. He's about 145 now. He's a rather big dog. But we went outside, and I told her, let's take the dog outside, have a cigarette, hang out, and wandered outside and kind of walked around the side of my parents' house. And the way my parents' house sits, it's on top of a hill, and most of the property is at the base of this hill. Well, we're sitting up on top of this hill, and my wife and I are talking, we're smoking. And I kind of noticed a few minutes in that there were no squirrel sounds or no real bird sounds, anything like that. I mean, it was dark, but everything had kind of gone silent, no crickets, no nothing. And I was like, oh, it's kind of weird. About 2 minutes later, this nastiest odor I've ever smelled in my entire life kind of hit us. And it was, to describe it, if you've ever come upon any type of like dead animal or, a bear kill or anything like that that's been sitting there for a while, and raw sewage, best way to explain it. Just kind of rotting flesh and, raw sewage.
What did you think it was?
At the time, I thought it was a cougar because, I've been around, I hunt a lot. So, at the time, I thought it was a cougar because, when cougars kill things, they get blood all over them and stuff, and a lot of the time they don't clean themselves off. So, you'll get that type of smell. So I just kind of went on high alert, told my wife, grab the dog, let's go inside. And she was like, what do you think that is? And I was like, it's probably just a mountain lion. It's not that big of a deal. We'll go inside. We leave it alone. It'll leave us alone. Start walking. And as we're walking, I could hear something walking on two legs. And like I said, I hunt. So, I know the difference between something with two legs and I know the difference between something with four legs. So I thought, okay, well, this might be a person. So whenever I'm at my parents' house, I have a gun on me always. And even now, I have a concealed carry permit. So pretty much wherever I go, I have a gun on me. And I was sitting there. I wasn't real worried about it. I was like, if the person they come up the hill, I can stop them. If it's a cougar, I can fire off a shot. It would take off. As we're walking back to the door, the smell was strong, but we walk inside and my mom goes, why'd you guys put back in? And I was like, I think you got a mountain lion outside. I'm going to go back out, chase it off. Not a big deal. Grab the flashlight. And the flashlight I have is a pretty decent flashlight. It's about 1,000 lumens. It's super bright. So I grabbed it, unholstered my gun, put it around in the chamber, walked out the door, start walking around the side of the house. And right when I walked out the door, the smell was twice as bad as what it was when I first walked in. And I was like, well, that's super weird. So I start making my way down this hill. And the way my parents' property is set up, off to the left, the hill drops down and it hits a road that runs through kind of the middle of their property. And at the base of their property is a bunch of old growth oak trees that are, pretty decently old. They're probably 60, 70 years old. They're fairly massive. And then there's a pathway that kind of walks down past the chicken coop. And then my parents have this almost like a cabin down at the bottom. Not really a cabin. It looks like one. So I kind of just beeline down the hill thinking, okay, it's a person, I can head them off, whatever, because they're probably going to use a path. They're not going to use walk straight up the hill. So I walked down and I wasn't shining my light directly out. I was pointing it at the ground just because the ambient light of this light will light up pretty much anything you're around and you can kind of see far out. And the whole reason I was doing that was, if it was a person, I wanted to be able to, if I had any kind of weird conflict or anything like that and drop my light, I could still see. start walking down this hill, get to the bottom of the hill, kind of looking around, walked over to the cabin. And as I'm walking around next to the cabin, I was like, okay, well, if it's a person, like I'd hide in something like this. I kind of walked around the edge of the cabin, didn't see anything. Start walking through the oak trees, kind of looking around. My parents, at about 40 yards away from the cabin, they have a little 3-walled structure that, you know, they put wood in and stuff like that. You know, kind of made my way around there, see if anybody was hiding in there. Didn't see anything. And as I'm making my way into there, I see out of the corner of my eye next to one of the big oak trees, something moved. And I stopped and I kind of looked over and didn't see anything. So I picked my flashlight up. I pointed my gun at the tree and you know, I yelled a whole bunch of super fun expletives. You know,
right.
You need to get out from behind the tree. Like, I have a gun, I'm going to shoot you. And didn't get a response. So, okay. So I start pieing off, and pieing off is just basically making a semicircle. And as I'm making the semicircle around the tree, you know, I'm pointing my light at it and working my way around. And as I got to the other end of the tree, I was like, there's nothing back here. Felt kind of dumb. Like, oh, you know, mine's playing tricks on me. You know, I'm seeing shadows, whatever. Turned my light off, went to turn around, and I was like, no, you know, it's dark. Like, I should probably keep this on. And I kicked it back on, and I turned the rest of the way around. I looked up, and as I looked up, about 20 yards in front of me, there was this creature kind of poking its head out from around one of the oak trees. And I froze. And I stood there and I stared at this thing. And as I'm staring at this thing, I'm going, what the hell is this? And, you know, like I said, my flashlight gives off enough ambient light to where, like, I could see it. I could see features. And it was about 7.5 feet tall. It was kind of poking out from behind the tree from about the center of its chest out. And that was probably 2.5 feet sitting out from one end of the tree, and it was looking at me. Didn't have any expression on its face. Didn't, you know, very wide mouth, very flat nose. And when I say flat, like just very large nostrils, and almost like a boxer that's been in the ring too long. Just his nose has been smashed in to the point where, you know, it's just very wide, you know, and very flat against its face. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, that looks like a person. It looks like a person. I just couldn't move. Like, I was sitting there and I'm holding my gun and I'm going, this thing is big enough to where if I shot it, I'd be screwed. This would just piss it off. And I mean, I had a 9mm, and I mean, 9mm self-defense rounds. And to be totally honest with you, as long as I've been going hunting, I've gone bear hunting, and I don't think my bear gun would have took this thing down. And this went on for about 15, 20 seconds. And I was staring at it. It was staring at me. And I heard the front door of my parents' house open, and I heard my wife yell down to me, you know, honey, what are you doing? And this thing looked up at the house, and I kind of unfroze at that point because it was like, shit, this thing is big enough to where if it runs up that hill, there's no way I'm catching it. And it very well could, you know, kill my whole family, and there'd be nothing I can do. So, I mean, now I'm getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to shoot this thing. And if it comes at me, it comes at me, and it is what it is. And it looked back at me, and it started making its way back from behind the tree. And when it made its way back from behind the tree, you could tell, like, and this thing was covered in black hair. I wouldn't call it fur. I'd call it hair. I didn't see any mats or anything like that. It looked like hair. It looked like human hair just all over the place. It had kind of grayish skin. And as it was walking, I think when I wrote to you, I wrote that it was sauntering. And I wouldn't even call it sauntering. It glided. Like, it was one of the most effortless walks I've ever seen. And it didn't make very much noise. And, I mean, it was December, so a lot of the leaves had fallen from the oak trees. And I mean, me walking around down there, I mean, I could hear myself walking around down there. You could hear rabbits or whatever else that was down there if you were down there. And as it's walking, it never broke eye contact with me. It never showed its teeth. It never made a sound. It literally just walked past me and it walked kind of at an angle, not totally towards me, but at an angle, and started walking across over towards where the wood thing is, like where the wood storage is. And it walked up this slight embankment, and as it walked up the embankment, at the very top of this embankment, there's a barbed wire fence. And it stepped over that barbed wire fence like it wasn't even there. And as its second foot cleared, I bolted. And I've never run so fast in my entire life. As fast as I could go, all the way through my parents' property, up the hill. And as I got crest of the top of the hill, my dad's standing there, my mom's standing there, and my wife's standing there, my daughter's standing at the door holding the puppy. And my wife was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." And like I couldn't really talk. It was just like, "Yeah." And my mom kind of looked at me and was like, "You're white as a ghost. What happened?" I was like, I wasn't real sure what I should tell them. I didn't want to tell them that there's a giant hairy man at the bottom of your hill on your property right now that I just ran into. I just the first thing that popped in my head was, I saw that cougar. I was real close to it. Kind of freaked me out. I'm fine. We should all probably just go inside though. And my dad kind of looked at me funny and he was like, "You didn't shoot at it?" And I was like, "Nah, there's no reason to." Kind of walked off. So, I grabbed my daughter, I picked my daughter up and walked into the house. I sat down on the couch and I was just holding my daughter and, staring out. My parents have this giant bay window and that looks out over the oaks. And my eyes never left that window. The whole time I was sitting there and, everybody kind of went back to the conversation they were having. And, my dad was kind of poking fun at me for the whole, cougar incident. Cougar scared Jared. No, yeah, that's nice. I mean, I don't even know how to explain to you how utterly frightening that was.
Yeah, I would imagine you were still trying to process what you had just seen.
I still to this day, this happened almost 2 years ago now. Still to this day, I could draw you its face. I could draw you how wide it was. Just the sheer massiveness of this thing was amazing. You could see muscle under all of that hair, and it was frighteningly large. And you could tell that this thing was very equipped to take out anything that got in its way. It's still to this day, I have nightmares.
Yeah, I would imagine you would still have nightmares over the incident. How would you compare its face compared to the Patterson-Gimlin film? Everyone's seen that. They kind of have an idea. Comparing its face to what you saw, what were the differences? What were the similarities? How would you compare it?
The similarity-wise, its mouth was just as wide as the Patterson-Gimlin footage. It was just very wide mouth, and its nose was much larger than the Patterson footage. It was wider on its face, not ape-like, but like I said, like a boxer that had just been in the ring for too long. It looked like something had basically stepped on its face and stood there for a minute. Forehead-wise, in comparison to the hairline, it had a full head of hair that almost went down to its eyebrows, and I'd compare it really close to the Patty footage, just a little bit different of features. Its nose was much wider, its mouth was about the same, its jaw wasn't super protruding, but you could tell. It had massive jaws. And like I said, it didn't open its mouth at me or anything like that, so I couldn't tell you what its teeth looked like. But size-wise, from what I could tell from the Patterson footage and this thing was bigger. This thing had to be 7.5 feet tall, easy. It was like looking at an NBA player on steroids.
Yeah, and how would you describe the eyes? Were the eyes more animal-like? Were they more human-like? Were you able to see the whites of the eyes? Did they reflect a certain color, or did they not reflect?
I couldn't see any whites of the eyes. The eyes were black, and the flashlight I was using, normally on any other animal, it would give some sort of eye shine to it. And I didn't get any eye shine at all. It sat there and just stared at me, and at that given point, I was more worried about it coming at me than I was most of its eye features. But its eyes were like a person's eyes, and close together, not almond shaped, a little much, much larger than a person, but, you know, close to the same shape as a person's eyes. You know, it's not real squinty almond size, but just round, very round. And like I said, it didn't show any type of aggressive movement at me or anything like that, but just the sheer size of it was terrifying. Like the fact that I was trying to process what the hell is standing in front of me right now is beyond any explanation I could ever get.
I can imagine. And then also, too, you know, when you're sitting there looking at this thing and you realize you have a gun in your hand, that gun feels really small really quick when you're that close. Oh,
yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty avid shooter, and I might have 2 firearms that I own that I would even attempt taking a shot at with one of these things. In order to put one of these down, like, there's no way a 9mm would ever put one down. It would, like I said, it would just piss it off. And I wasn't prepared to just piss it off.
Yeah, no, and I can understand that. What's interesting, I thought, when you and I first spoke, is your dad had said he thought someone was on the property. Do you mind talking a little bit about that? Why did your dad think there was someone on the property?
I mean, my dad had told me that he thought somebody was on the property, and I mean, where the road kind of runs through the middle of the property. I mean, people drive up and down that road all day long, and it's technically not a road. It's a wash that they've graded, and it's kind of a shortcut into another section of the neighborhood that he lives in. And I mean, my dad had told me one time he had gone outside and he had seen somebody kind of walking away from the driveway. And I mean, when you walk out my parents' front door, you can see the end of the driveway. My parents' end of the driveway is probably 120 yards. I mean, it's a good distance out from the front of the house. And he said he had seen somebody kind of walking away up the road and kind of turned a corner. And at the top of the road, you can't see to the right because there's a house there. You can't see to the left because the hill kind of keeps going up and it kind of breaks off and drops back down to where the main road kind of runs up and down. And he had seen somebody walking away. And I was like, it's probably somebody walking their dog. Like, people do that all the time. And he was like, yeah, but, you know, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know, didn't think much of it. Was, you know, didn't put any thought to it. It was just like, you know, people walk up and down this road all the time. But I mean, he was telling me that this alarm system that he had set up was just kind of like a laser, that if you block the laser, it would ding in the house. And he said there was a point where it would go off 30, 40 times in an hour. And I was like, it's probably a rabbit. You know, it's probably coyotes. I mean, there's tons of coyotes out there. There's tons of rabbits. There's deer. There's, you know, bobcats, mountain lions. And I mean, I've seen all of the above on that property, and it just didn't put any thought to it. And when he told me that there was a person, I was just kind of like, you know, people walk up and down the road all the time. It's, you know, not that big of a deal. You know, he was just like, I just thought it was odd. And, you know, the guy walking away looked kind of big. And I was like, you know, maybe you got a big neighbor. You know, who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever gone back and talked to your dad, kind of pulled him to the side, or your wife, or anyone in your family, and said, hey, listen, that night I was out, it wasn't a cougar. Here's kind of what I saw.
No, I mean, my wife she's in the veterinarian field. So, I mean, she's very skeptical of anything like that. It's actually kind of funny. Anytime I've ever brought up, you know, Bigfoot, I mean, because my encounter caused me to look into stuff a lot more than I had previously known. I mean, I'd seen, you know, Finding Bigfoot. I'd seen a couple, like, you know, the reality shows and all of that stuff. I've seen a handful of documentaries, stuff like that. To be totally honest with you, you know, my dad is a retired Marine. I mean, kind of a no-nonsense guy. He grew up in West Virginia, actually not too far from, like, all the Mothman encounter kind of stuff. And I mean, he's mentioned, like, Mothman stuff and stuff like that, but I've never really sat down with anybody. Like, I mean, there's a handful of people I've ever told this story, you included, and one is my best friend that I've been friends with for, you know, 21 years. And in all those years, like, I mean, it was more of the ridicule that I was afraid of than anything else, just because I'm not an out there kind of person. Like, I'm very reserved and very collected, you know.
Yeah.
It just never thought to pull my dad aside. And I mean, the more from talking to you earlier and then talking to you today, I might actually pull my dad aside and talk to him. He might be a little bit more understanding. But I mean, my wife has actually gotten in arguments with me about the existence of Bigfoot and things like that. So I mean, I don't think I could ever really sit her down and try and really explain it. One, because the way she is, I'm pretty sure she'd be like, absolutely not, we're never going back to your parents' house. And two, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think she'd believe me.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's always fun and games until it happens to you. It's a big joke or it doesn't exist, and then when you come face to face with it, it's shocking. Even if you have kind of that mentality of, well, something could be out there, or I believe something's out there, when you come face to face with it, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, it really shakes you. So I can understand that. Have you gone around the property since your encounter, taken a walk around and just see if you can find any prints or?
Not really looking for prints. I mean, I go to my parents' house probably once or twice a month, and I mean, I have a younger brother that kind of into hiking, stuff like that. So I mean, probably 2-3 months ago, my brother and I were at the house, kind of hanging out, and he was like, "Hey, let's go for a hike." And I mean, where this thing had walked, it's a property that doesn't have a house on it, so it's about 7 acres of old growth oak trees, and where you can walk into it is where that barbed wire is. It butts up against another fence, and that the pole that supports the barbed wire has actually been pushed over to where you can actually walk through it. Like a grown man can walk through it, no problem. So my brother and I kind of gone through for a walk down through there a couple of times, but a few months ago we took a walk, and as we're walking through that section of that property, and it kind of goes back under some oaks, and you can tell there's like an old, not a wash, but like there used to be an old creek or drainage or some natural drainage that comes down, and we were kind of following that and walking up, and we walked through these oak trees, and as we walk through these oak trees, you kind of walk out, and there's this giant rock outcropping out there that's massive. I mean, it's huge. And as I was looking at the ground, I was starting to notice, lots of scat, lots of, coyote prints, stuff of that nature. And my brother's like, "Oh, what do you think this is?" And I'm like, "Well, this is one of two things, man. This is either, a mountain lion den or a coyote den." And we kind of looked over, and about 30, 40 yards in front of us, up in a tree, there was a deer kill. And I told my brother, "Dude, we need to go." And he was like, "Why?" And I was like, "See that?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm all that's a kill. That deer didn't run up that tree and, impale himself on that branch. We should probably go." So we kind of walked out, and I did, the whole time, like I felt like I was being watched as I was walking out through there. And I mean, even as I was coming down the hill during my encounter, like it felt like something was watching me. And so, I mean, we walked out, kind of went about our day and didn't say anything after that. But I go down to my parents' house all the time. I go down there, it's one of the few places in Southern California that you can shoot on your own property. So we go down there, shoot guns, hang out, barbecue. My other younger brother, he just actually had a wedding right where I had my encounter. And funny enough, like before it even got dark, my wife and I left, and my wife was like, "Why do you want to go home?" I was like, I just want to go. And I mean, even with 100 people down there, like I'm not real excited to be down there at night. I mean, I have been down out in the oaks at night, but I always have somebody with me. I always have, like I said, I always have a firearm on me. But I mean, I'm very cautious and attentive now when I'm down there.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I wanted to ask you, what color was the face? I know you mentioned the rest of the body was white. Was the face, the rest of the body was black, excuse me. But was the face black too as well, or was it a different color?
It was like a dark grayish color. It's very, almost like the pad of a dog. Like not totally black, but it's like a dark gray.
I gotcha.
But from as it was walking away from me, it didn't have huge arm swing or anything like that. I mean, you could kind of make out the palms of it, and it had a similar color on its hand. But its face was a darkish gray, almost leathery consistency.
And has your dad ever talked about anything ever hitting the house or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, he's told me that there's tons of animals out there. I mean, it kind of to go back, like when everybody had gone to bed that night because we had spent the night there. I couldn't sleep. I ended up pulling a hunting rifle out of my dad's safe and sitting in the front living room with it loaded and looking out that window. And I mean, they have lights that go all the way around the house, but my mom never turns them on. And I asked her why one day, and she was like, "Oh, it attracts wildlife." And I was like, "I've never heard of lights attracting wildlife. Most of the time it, deters them." And she just kind of blew it off and was like, no, we've had stuff at the window. And, I figured raccoons, deer, whatever. But I mean, now the more I think of it, the more I wonder if my parents have had weird encounters or experiences. And I mean, like I said, I'm probably going to talk to my dad and just ask him, I don't want to ask him flat out, like, have you seen a Sasquatch on the property? But I want to ask him, like, have you had anything weird happen? From what I can tell, no, nothing's ever been thrown. I mean, there are tons of rocks around the property. There's tons of things that they could throw, but nothing. He's never mentioned anything.
Yeah, it may not be a bad idea to ask your dad, hey, do you ever had anything weird out here happen? Or do you ever have, and you might be surprised too, some of the neighbors, I bet if you ask them, they could probably tell you they've seen some things, especially if it's coming through like that. The one thing to keep in mind is usually when you see one, usually there's another one close by. I think this encounter is interesting, though, because it really wasn't aggressive towards you at all. It didn't growl. It made no vocalizations. You just kind of eyed each other for a while, and it got up and walked away. I think that's fascinating and kind of says a lot. When I talk to a lot of witnesses, as you and I talked the other night, I said the ones that seem to be more human-like, or when people describe them more human-like, they almost seem to be a little bit less aggressive and a little bit more intelligent. I haven't had too many. I've had a few, but I haven't had too many aggressive behaviors when people say it looked like a person.
Yeah, I mean, like you were telling me the other night, the ones that really look more chimpanzee, like Texas area ones, are much more aggressive than ones out here. But like I said, I mean, he didn't. And I say he, but I mean, I don't know if it was a he or not, but it didn't show any real aggression towards me. It was just the sheer size of the thing was terrifying. I mean, I've been within 10 yards of a 900-pound grizzly bear, and this thing dwarfed that in size, shoulder width. I mean, and it was a person, and it was person-like. It was very. It just, I mean, that's the best way I can describe it. It was person-like. You could tell there was some intelligence there. You could tell that I don't think it wanted to hurt me. I don't know if it was checking me out. I don't know what it was doing, but like I said, I mean, the gun I had in my hand wouldn't have done anything. If it was going to attack me, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
Yeah, you were kind of at its mercy, and it really didn't do anything. And I find that interesting. Like I said, as you and I talked, people start describing them more chimp-like or, a little bit of the different types, especially the ones that look chimp-like seem to be way more aggressive. If you were in Texas and I think that you ran into this thing, it probably would have growled at you. It probably would have bluff charged you. It might have ripped you to pieces. But for whatever reason, with these other types, they seem to be a little bit more relaxed, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, it wasn't threatening, like I said. I mean, it wasn't aggressive in any way. It really had no expression on its face. It was just very expressionless, stared at me. I stared back at it. I've never been so terrified in my entire life.
Yeah, and that's the worst part of it is the no expression, because you don't know what it's going to do. When you see any other wild animal, you can almost see the expression change in their eyes or their face, right before they attack. For something like this, not to change expression, not to growl at you, it's like a Mexican standoff. Who's going to make the first wrong move? Yeah,
and I wasn't about to make that first wrong move.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Well, be safe while you're out there, and keep me up to date. If you talk to your dad or if you go out there, be safe while you're out there. Treat it the same way you would a grizzly bear, because you just never know. They seem to be unpredictable. So I would treat it the same way you would a grizzly bear. keep me up to date. Let me know what's going on out there.
Yeah, I definitely will, Wes, and I appreciate you having me on the show. And I mean, it is nice to have somebody to talk to that, has an understanding of this and not look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're crazy at all. In fact, your description's right on, and even some of the behavior I've heard in the past is right on. I would just be a little bit careful around that property. I'm sure if it was going to do something, if it would have shown aggression, it would have done it a long time ago with your parents being there. But, just keep your eyes and your ears open while you're out there.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely will.
Thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it, man.
All right. Thank you, Wes.
My next guest tonight is Garrett. Garrett, thanks for coming on tonight, man. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
And I was pretty interested in your account. Kind of start from the beginning. You and your wife were out camping. Do you kind of want to walk the audience into the encounter story? Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So this happened a couple weekends ago. I live down here in southeastern Utah. It's a beautiful part of the country. Got 2 national parks down here, Arches and Canyonlands. A lot of great outdoor activity out here, a lot of recreation, a lot of good places to go camping, other things like that. But, on this particular Saturday, it was my wife's birthday, and we decided we'd like to go camping on a mountain range about 50 miles south of where I live. These mountains are called the Abajos. Really, really pretty area. Big alpine mountains surrounded by slick rock, deep canyons. It's just a really cool area. So we got all of our gear together and we drove down to the Abajos. We went up to a campground that we'd been to before. We set up camp, pulled out the cooler, we put some board games on top of it, and we were just playing board games throughout the evening, just enjoying our time together. About 10 o'clock rolls around. We're both getting a little tired. And, suddenly we hear 3 distinct whistles back to back. There was probably, a second between each whistle. This whistle went from a low-pitch frequency to a high-pitch frequency. But I want to emphasize that just the volume and just, the amount, how loud that whistle was, it was really startling, and it really struck some fear into both of us. And also, Wes, I'd like to point out, I spent my whole life growing up in rural Utah. When I wasn't in school, I was out camping, hiking, hunting, or fishing. When I'm not playing outside, I work outside. Over the last few years, I've worked as a wildland firefighter and also as an ATV, UTV hunter guide. So, I really enjoy spending time outdoors. I've had encounters with bears, not many, but enough to know how they act, how they sound, stuff like that. But
yeah, this wasn't your first rodeo out in the woods.
No. I'd like to say I'm an avid outdoorsman, so spend a lot of time out there. So when we heard this whistle, it's something that I've never heard before. And as soon as that third whistle ended, my wife looked at me and she just told me, "I'm going to go lay down." Of course we said, "What was that?" We were both kind of awestruck in what that was. We didn't know. Neither of us had ever heard something like that. So she went and laid down, and needless to say, I was quick behind her. I didn't want to be sticking around out there by myself. We both went and laid down and tried to get some sleep, but I could not fall asleep for the life of me. Throughout that night, I'd say I didn't get more than 30 or 40 minutes of sleep total. This campground we were in, it's covered with gamble oak leaf litter. Every now and again, I'd hear kind of those bipedal steps, but it was kind of strange because I'd only hear 3 or 4 at a time. It wasn't continuous, 10, 11 steps, whatever. So I guess I kind of discounted that. I thought it was either, something else out in the woods, or I was just imagining it because I was pretty terrified at this point.
What was it that terrified you? Was it hearing the whistles kind of started it all off, or?
I had never heard anything like that in my life. In all my time camping and hunting, I just never heard anything like that. This whistle, it sounded like it was only 50, 60 yards away. Kind of well outside of the shine of our campfire. But the direction this whistle was coming from was either mid-canopy or it was, 8 or 9 feet off the ground. It just was really, really fearful.
Yeah, no, I get you. And I know the whistle, I know it sound, the way you describe it, going from low to high. There's one I was trying to find. I couldn't find it. I was going to play it for you and see if that's what you heard. But I get it. So you guys crawl in the tent, and you're laying there, and you hear what sounds like footsteps?
Yeah, that's right. And like I mentioned, it was only, 3 or 4 at a time. So I'm not really sure what that means or what, but it could have been something walking around out there, or it could not have been. As the night progresses on, I'd hear my wife starting to snore and fall asleep, so I'd start to doze off a little as well. And right before I'd fall asleep, she'd roll over and grab me and say, "There's a bear outside the tent." And I'd say, "No, there's not," because, if a bear's walking through your camp, you can really hear them huffing and puffing.
Yeah.
They have those really heavy breaths. I wasn't hearing any of that. I guess I said that just out of fear. I really didn't want to get out of the tent and look around for her. But I really just wanted to lay there and discount it as something else. But, that happened 3 or 4 times throughout the night. And I don't know what time this was, but I'm guessing I had been laying in my tent for about 3 or 4 hours. Something was thrown horizontally against my tent. And the object was probably no larger than, a 50-cent piece, whatever, but it was thrown hard enough that it bounced through the material of the tent and kind of bounced off my head. I was thinking, did that fall from the trees, or was it thrown horizontally? And I don't understand how something could fall on top of the tent and then hit the side of the tent, rough enough that it kind of bounced off my head.
What do you think it was? Do you think it was rocks, or?
I think it was a rock or, a piece of wood or something. But like I said, it didn't feel any bigger than a 50-cent coin. Later during the night, my wife heard this and I heard this as well. It sounded like there was something that had made 2 points of contact on the tent and would drag its fingers along the top of the tent for a second or two. And we both heard that, once or twice over the course of the evening. To kind of cap things off on this whole ordeal, kind of in the later hours of the night, I wasn't keeping track of time, but I began hearing what I think were vocalizations on the slope of the mountain, maybe a mile or 2 away from our campground.
What kind of vocalizations?
So these vocalizations, it sounded like a low whoop. Here in Utah during this time of year, ranchers, they run their cows up on the mountain just because the grass is growing really thick, the weather's favorable. And I know what a cow bellow sounds like. When I first started hearing this vocalization, I was like, is that a cow? It really doesn't sound like any cow I've been around. Then I started thinking, is it an owl? But this vocalization, it was long enough, and the pitch change, from lower to higher, it didn't sound like an owl to me. When owls hoot, it sounds like these, they're just kind of short and repetitive. They don't really change pitch at all. And it sounded like there was 2 different things creating these vocalizations. One, a mile or 2 south of the other one on the slope of this mountain. And I heard this a dozen times, just back and forth at each other. I also thought, maybe it's a raven up there in the tree, but these were deep enough that it didn't sound like the shrill caw of a raven or a crow. So again, I'm not going to say that was Bigfoot or not. But again, it was one of those very strange vocalizations that I've never heard before, in my 25 years of hunting and camping here in Utah. And hearing those things it terrified me. My hair was standing on end the entire night. I can't recall an evening where I felt more scared, a more sleepless night due to fear. It was a heck of an ordeal, Wes.
I'd be terrified too, especially if they're running their fingers across the top of your tent.
Yeah.
And again, I've heard other witnesses talk about that too, the exact same thing. What did you guys do next?
I laid awake gripping my handgun all evening. It brought me no consolation. It was a 45 long Colt. Some people call it a Judge. Pretty powerful handgun, but
very powerful.
I could not get this fear out of me, and I wanted to get some sleep and discount all this to just, coincidence or whatever it may be. But, I could not shake that feeling. There's some instinct in me telling me to stay awake and stay alert. Right before dawn, it started to trickle rain, and so I woke my wife up and asked her if she'd help me get the rain fly on. And just the 10, 15-yard walk from my tent to the pickup, those were some of the most terrifying couple of seconds of my life that I can recall, having to step out there into the darkness with just a headlamp on and try to wrestle this rain fly on before God knows what comes out of the darkness and exposes itself to us. I can't say that this was an awesome visual experience. I can't say I found a cool footprint or heard just a body shaking growl, but I can't discount the feelings of terror that my wife and I both experienced that evening. I want to reiterate again, I've spent the better part of my life in the outdoors here in Utah. I'm very familiar with the wildlife and how they behave during different parts of the year. And this is just something I have never experienced or heard anyone else describe to me before.
Did you guys end up leaving?
The sun rose and we were quick to get out of there. And kind of the unsettling thing is this is a popular campground for my wife's family, so I got a bad feeling we're going to be going back there to have family campfires and whatever. But yeah, when the sun rose, when the sun peeked over the side of the mountain there, I woke my wife up and told her, let's get out of here. I did not have a good night, and I don't think you did either. I've been listening to your show since February. I've always kind of been interested in the subject of Bigfoot, whatever, it's pretty interesting to me. I'm very believing of people's accounts, but my wife has always been pretty skeptic. She kind of thinks I'm a dork for it. But after this evening, after that evening, my wife, she's had a very different attitude. And jokingly a few times, she acted sarcastic about it, but she said, yeah, that was probably Sasquatch, or that was probably Bigfoot. I know that she can't explain what happened to us any better than I can. Just from what I know about the subject, what you guys have explained on your podcast, I have a strong feeling that we may have encountered one of those creatures. And something I forgot to mention at the beginning, Wes, but in 1978, a fellow down there in the same county, probably about 20 miles from where we camped, he reported a Bigfoot sighting where he saw an arm and a shoulder shaking a tree, and he heard this thing stomping through the woods. There's also a petroglyph panel that's about 1,000 years old in the Canyon Rims Recreation Area here in southeastern Utah. It's called the Bigfoot panel. And there's a petroglyph scratched into the rock of a large-footed, broad-shouldered figure. I don't know what that means. I can't interpret it, but, just kind of some interesting tidbits about the area. So.
Yeah, there's definitely activity going on in that area. I get reports from some of the local tribe. I get reports of just people out hunting and hiking. You wouldn't think of that of Utah, but Utah's a lot greener than most people realize. It's beautiful there. I think a lot of people think, or maybe they don't, what do I know, but I think, if you haven't been there, you think maybe desert, and there's a lot more to Utah than just that. There's some very beautiful green areas, and there's plenty of places to hide there in Utah if one of these things wanted to hide.
Yeah, and when people think of Moab, where I'm from, they think of Arches and Canyonlands National Park, the Red Rock and the Slick Rock. But the town of Moab is built on this, right beneath the La Salle Mountains, which is actually Utah's second tallest mountain range. These mountains are enormous. The tallest peak stands at almost 12,800 feet. And the Abajo Mountains that we camped on, during the evening of our experience. That peak, it's 11,000 feet tall. And, all around these mountains are thick aspen, ponderosa pine, white pine, gamble oak. It's spectacular hunting out here, and I don't see why one of these creatures or many of them could be lurking around. You hear about the Mogollon monster down in Arizona.
Yeah.
Terrain is very similar down there, as it is up here in southeastern Utah. And then down on the Navajo reservation, there are a lot of accounts that I've found.
And, from your own encounter, it sounded like a lot of little things added up. You might be able to pass off one of them, but one after another. And those are the sightings, I think, that terrify people the most, is when you don't see what's causing it. You don't know what is out there. You know something's out there, but you don't know what it is. And just off the vocalizations that you described and some of the other things that you described, it sounds like you may have crossed paths with these things.
I'm definitely not going to discount it. I can't say that I can visually confirm this, but, just from what I experienced, I'm adding this up to definitely an encounter. I know what I heard. I know what I experienced. That's why I wanted to give you a call and let you know about this, Wes. So.
No, I appreciate it. And if you would, keep me updated if you end up going back. Let me know if anything else happens out there. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing it.
Yeah, Wes. And I just want to mention to you, man, don't feel like you're doing a thankless duty. I greatly appreciate that I can call in to someone who's had a pretty scary experience and let you know what happened to me, just so I can get this off my chest. It really is a huge relief. I'm glad my wife was there to experience it with me, so I wasn't just saying this myself. But I'm really glad that your program is here so that people like myself can share what we believe are encounters. So
thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, keep up the good work, man, and thanks again.
Thanks, Garrett. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Have a safe and great Memorial Day weekend. I will see you guys back on Sunday. Have a good night, everyone. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. I have two guests lined up. Johnny's going to be coming on to talk about his property out in East Texas. He just recently moved to this property, has had a lot of strange things happen, and even had a sighting one night when him and his wife were sitting out back. So look for that here in a moment. Duke from World Bigfoot Radio is going to be on the show, and Duke wanted to follow up with me on some of the insider information. I'm thinking about calling it Conspiracy Corner with Duke. It's stuff I never really get a chance to get into with the show, and it being Memorial Day weekend, it'll be nice to kind of sit back, relax, just talk about some stranger stuff than Bigfoot. So we'll be doing that too later on this evening. How's your 3-day weekend treating you? I hope you do have a 3-day weekend. Like I said on Friday night's show, back when I worked for the Man, it seemed like I was always working on weekends like this, where it's a holiday weekend, and for some reason I always found myself working on those weekends. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Thank you again for being here tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. You can hit me up on Twitter under SasquatchChron. If you go to Facebook, look up Sasquatch Chronicles, you'll find a group. A lot of different ways to contact me, but shoot me your encounter. If you've had anything strange happen while you're out there, definitely shoot me an email. And a lot of fun things to get to tonight. Let's jump right into it. Johnny, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, and appreciate you giving me a call and giving me the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I was pretty interested in your encounter, or your several encounters. I call them little mini encounters.
Exactly.
Tell us about this property. When did you guys move into it?
We moved in this year in mid-March.
When did you first start noticing stuff going on around the property?
Probably like it had to been the first week. We had some stuff that happened. The first incident, it was early in the night, but it was pitch black outside, and I just moved in, so I wanted to check out the fireplace. So I put on a little headlamp and started walking towards the edge of the yard to grab some firewood. As I got to the edge of the porch, I noticed some eyes, some eye glare, and I looked back at it, and I'm expecting, it's wildlife, and once the light hit, I'm expecting for it to be scared or run off, but it didn't. It just like stayed there and stared at me, and I really couldn't see the body to make out exactly what kind of animal it was. Basically, I can say that it had big eyes. They were somewhat probably far apart, so I knew it couldn't be something like a raccoon or something smaller than that. And as I stood there, I just kind of got this kind of like a fear, I guess you can say, came over where I didn't feel really safe. So I started slowly backing up because I was feeling like that, even though it seemed to be like maybe 3 foot off the ground. I really didn't know what it was, so I started backing up slowly because I know there can be like wild hogs and other things like that around here. So I started backing up, and once I got to the gate to the porch, probably wasn't the brightest idea. I probably wouldn't do it again, but I decided I'd let the dogs out because I feel like, that would scare whatever it was away. So as I was approaching back to the area, the dogs, they weren't barking. They really didn't seem that there's anything there. They were just like sniffing the ground in front of me. And as I approached, I saw the eyes again. It was still there staring at me. But maybe a few seconds went by, and then it noticed the dogs coming closer to the edge of the woods. You can tell by how the eyes were that it turned, and then it like shuffled off. And I still wasn't really for sure what it was. It could have been like any kind of wildlife. It just kind of like was kind of like, wow, that's kind of creepy. Got a creepy feeling from it. A day or so later, I was on the porch, and I noticed by this old tin shed that we have right before you enter the woods, there's these two like skinny trees that were broken off at the same height, probably about 7 to 8 foot tall. And I was like, man, that's really strange looking. And so I went over there and I pushed on one of them, and it just fell over. And another one, I just pulled it out of the ground. I was like, well, these aren't even trees. These are just like tree limbs that someone just stuck in the middle of the ground there. And I just thought it was this kind of weird place to put tree limbs. And, that was it. And then the other little mini thing that happened, the week that we moved in, it was storming outside, thundering and things like that, and raining pretty hard. It was about 3 or so in the morning, and I couldn't sleep, so I was in bed just messing around with my cell phone, looking on Facebook or whatever, and trying to pass the time was able to feel sleepy again. And I heard a big bang, and I was like, what is that? And I thought that maybe the door of the shed, something like that, flew open from the wind. And then I heard it again, and I was like, that actually sounds kind of like a knock. And I heard it again, and it sounded like, it was just like right outside the house. And so I woke up my wife, and I was like, hey, listen, I think there's an animal or somebody out there making this weird knocking noise. And so we're listening for it, and I was like, of course, now that I woke you up, probably won't happen again. But it did. She heard it. And I was like, well, should I go out there and see what it is? And she was like, well, if you do, you might want to take a gun with you because it sounds pretty big, and it just sounded very powerful. And we heard it again, and that was it. So it was like this kind of knocking, and then the next day we was talking about it, and I was like, what do you think that was? It still kind of just got me thinking about it. It's kind of a little disturbing. And she was like, I don't know. She's like, but I want to, maybe we should start making sure our car's locked up at night because it sounded like it might be, maybe a person making that noise. And she's like, I don't think an animal will be able to do that. And I was like, well, where do you think that it was? And she's like, I think it was probably on the porch. And I was like, well, that's, pretty creepy.
Was it hitting the house?
No, it wasn't hitting the house. It was hitting something, but it didn't sound like it was really hitting the house. It could have been maybe hitting the porch, because it did sound like wood on wood type sound, like a big like pop, like a big bang, like a solid, like a whop.
That's interesting. Your wife, it was loud enough to where your wife was like, hey, I think it was on the porch. I get what you're saying now.
Yeah. The dogs are always kind of barking, but, they're dogs. They bark at all kinds of stuff. So it's like, you always kind of hear things. There's a lot of deer around here, and there's hogs and stuff like that's coming through the property. And so you kind of just brush off stuff, of it could be, anything of, but I guess we probably was here, probably like 3 weeks, into 3 weeks. And then we're sitting on the porch at the table. The dogs jumped up and ran to the gate of the porch and wanted out. They smelled something and wanted to go and investigate it. So I went ahead and just let them out. They took off running towards the right side of the house and to the woods, and they weren't gone that long. And they came back, running back just as fast as they ran there. But they came in, I got up, went and shut the gate, sat back down at the table, and I'm actually facing the back of the woods. And then I saw a movement, and I thought, a deer. So I looked at it, and it didn't look like a deer. It had 2 legs, tall, broad shoulders, and a round head, and it kind of like set it kind of like on the shoulders, I'm sure it had a neck, but you couldn't see like a neck like you would if it was a person. Unfortunately, this old tin shed thing that's in the back, it walked, and when it walked, the tin shed blocked the view of it. And when it passed, I was kind of like, I didn't say nothing to my wife because I was kind of like still trying to figure out, okay, I just saw something, don't know what it was. And I was just kind of just thinking, well, it didn't have hind legs. Bears are really rare around here. And I go, it really didn't, the head just didn't look like, to me, it would have been the body and stuff really just didn't look like it would have been a bear.
Was it walking upright the whole time?
Yeah. And something, I couldn't put my finger on it because I didn't see it for long, but something that tells me there was something kind of weird with the legs, like how it moved, you know what I mean? Like, maybe they were like kind of long, and just the way it kind of like stepped, it was kind of strange, so I don't know, like, I really don't think it was a person. And recently, my brother came over, and he's just a normal sized guy, 5'11", and I asked him if he'd be willing to walk out to where I saw the figure, just to give me an idea of what it would be like with a human, with a normal person being there.
Yeah, comparison.
And it was a lot bigger than him as far as like body size, and it was taller than him, and asked him to, raise his hands up and tell him when to stop. And then when he came back to me, I took out a tape measure and asked him to put his hands back where he thought that he had it risen to, and I measured approximately 7 foot. So I was like, so we're like, yeah, that can't be a person. Most people aren't that tall, But when I saw it, before I told my wife I saw it, I was still trying to like figure out, and I was just what it was, because I didn't see a snout, like a muzzle on it. So I was like, well, it couldn't have been an animal. And, and I've seen pictures online of Bigfoot and things like that. And I was like, it really didn't look like that either, because I'm thinking, what's normally what you might see like in, Northern California and those type of places. That's where I've lived in the past, 23 years. So that's kind of like what I think of Bigfoot, more like the gorilla head with the almond shape, at the top, little mound or whatever on top of the head.
Right.
And I was like, it didn't look like that either. I don't know what it was. So I started kind of thinking, man, did I just see a ghost? some type of shadow, because it looked like a shadow, and if it wasn't moving, I probably would never even saw it. The only reason why I noticed it because I saw the movement of it.
Yeah.
And then, well, I'm trying to figure out, what could that have been. Me and my wife heard something really kind of heavy stepping, I guess you can say, coming to the right of us, of the house in the little woods there, and she just kind of laughed, and she was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And she's like, "I can't believe the dogs got up, ran off to go see something that we didn't even, that we couldn't even hear, and here we are, we hearing this walking, and they're not even like barking or anything." And I was like, and then that's when I told her, I was like, "Well, I just saw something really big walking back there, and I don't know what it could have been." And she asked what it looked like, and I described it to her, and we heard it walking towards us, closer to us. But then once we kind of start talking, I really didn't hear the sound anymore. So I don't know if it actually stopped or if it just kept on walking. But it just kind of like, I thought, I wonder if that what the dogs might have smelt or heard and took off running, then maybe made it walk another direction, and maybe they had to run in with it and just didn't want to have to face it again, so that's why they're being so quiet. But but yeah, I really don't know what it was.
Yeah.
So I watch the TV shows that's on Discovery and Animal Planet and stuff like that. So I thought, well, let me research it a little bit more. So I started listening to podcasts and doing a little bit more, some Google searches. And then I found out there's more than one type of Bigfoot. And so now I was like, wow, maybe I did see that, because from what I've learned was that down in the South, they say that it resembles more of a chimpanzee than a gorilla. And it makes sense because it had a little bit more, it had more of a rounded head than a gorilla. So I kind of thought, well, maybe I did, had a visual sighting of a Bigfoot around here, So
When you first saw the shadows and it moving, I can understand you thinking, did I just see a ghost? Or if you have no reference really to put it to, there's really no explanation. And they do move kind of weird. It's not quite like a person. And it's that description of what you're giving, kind of the football player, shoulder pads, helmet right on top, the big round head.
Yeah.
I get that a lot from your What did you guys do next? Did you guys just sit there, or did it?
We just sat there. We're just kind of like, I'm just kind of like, we continued our evening like usual. We're out there, talking and having some cigarettes, smoking cigarette. We just kind of like, what was that? And we're just like, and I told her I saw something and really can't explain what it was, what it could have been. And I was like, and I was like, I don't know. I was like, you think it could have been a person, and it's because we're talking about, basically we started talking about how heavy it sounded. It sounded like, I don't know, something that weighed a lot. It didn't sound something light walking through. And also what got me kind of curious about the way it was walking was that, why would it want me to hear it? I kind of feel like most animals are kind of shy and don't want any kind of attention, I kind of feel like, brought to it. So I kind of wondered if it was coming maybe to check us out, but wanted, I don't know, you understand what I'm trying to get at? It's like, why would it make noise when I kind of feel like it probably wouldn't have to?
Kind of like I'm here type of walking.
Yeah. It was really heavy and, loud. And it's mainly a lot of leaves and some sticks and stuff like that. And it was clear it was stepping on things and wasn't at all trying to hide itself.
And I can understand, a lot of people, they'll probably wonder, why didn't you yell at it? But when you see it and you're trying to process what you're looking at, and you're like, well, a person doesn't make sense. I mean, I could kind of see you standing there just kind of looking at the way this thing's moving. How far away from you do you think the creature was?
I'd say maybe 20 yards.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's really close, yeah. Yeah, it was right there, yeah.
Did you guys smell anything by chance?
No. We didn't smell anything, and there's been like one night, my wife said that she kind of smelled something, but I really didn't smell it. And I work as an animal control officer, so I dealt with skunks and stuff like that. So when a skunk sprays, you smell it. There's no doubt that there's a skunk in the area, and that kind of way that people have described the smell, I kind of feel like it would be the same way, because they're saying it was like the most awful smell that they ever smelled. So I kind of thought, well, I don't think was it, but no, I didn't have any smell, and I really haven't smelt anything.
Have you gone around the property and looked for tracks or anything like that?
Yeah. A couple of days after, actually, I was in the back going towards where I have the water hose. I was going to fill up the dog's water bowl, and there was actually an anthill, believe it or not, that had like a print in it. And I took a snapshot of it, and I asked my wife, I was like, hey, you mind just going and looking at that anthill? And she went and she looked at it, and I was like, what do you think of it? She goes, it looks like a footprints in it. And I was like, yeah. So I measured like 12 inches by, I think it was like 6 inches at the widest part. And it was an anthill, so it wasn't all that perfect. But one thing that I noticed from it that was different is that the big toe was off to the side a little bit, kind of like a person's thumb.
Yeah,
I guess you can say. And I was trying to count how many toes it was, but I really couldn't tell, if it was 3 or 4, because it wasn't very clear. But you can kind of see that it was some little toes there.
One of the questions I want to ask you is, have you heard any vocalizations around the property?
It's been fairly quiet. When we first moved in, there was a lot of coyotes howling and stuff like that. And every now and then we might hear something. It was like, what was that? But the coyotes, I kind of feel like they had moved on. You don't hear them that much anymore. And it's been, fairly quiet as far as that. But last weekend I was outside. It was probably around like 10:30 so at night, and me and my wife was outside actually together. And I don't know how to describe it. I guess it sounded like a big yelp, kind of long out, and we were just kind of like, what was that? And I was like, and we just looked at each other, and I was like, I'm going inside. She goes, well, you don't have to tell me twice. So we went inside, and I kind of really feel like that was probably a Bigfoot sound. And the following night, I was outside. Can't recall exactly what time it was, but probably close about the same time. And I heard I guess the best way I can really explain it sounded like an ape going whoop. I really can't repeat this, the sound of it, but it was like a big like whoop, and then I heard another one go whoop right after it.
Sound like primate type sounds out there.
Yeah. So after that, I just kind of went inside. That's pretty much for as vocals. A lot of times, I think inside the house, you really can't hear too much that's going on because you have the TV on and things like that, and you're talking.
Right. Yeah. There was an incident with your dog, wasn't there?
Yeah, I was on the couch watching TV, and it was like middle of the day, and I heard my dog. I have a couple dogs, but all dogs. If you know your dogs, they have a certain bark to them, right. Where if they bark, you know which dog it is. And I heard it bark a couple times, and it kind of yelped, like something had hurt it, like it was hurt. And so I jumped up real quick and ran outside, but my dog was right there in the front yard.
That's strange.
Yeah, it like spooked me out a little bit, and I told my wife about it. She's like, "Well, did you go look? Maybe there's an injured dog back there." And I was like, "No, I didn't go look. I go. Plus, I had my 2-year-old daughter with me, and I didn't want to leave her unattended or bring her out there with me. So I just left it be."
I've had a witness one time on the past that talked about that. He kind of started out the way your property's kind of starting out, and he said that one time he heard his dog crying in pain, and so he climbed down this ravine because that's where he heard it, and he got down there, and it was just starting to get dark, and he realized his dog wasn't down there, and he started getting surrounded by these things, and so he ran back up the ravine, and his dog was sitting on his front porch. But he's like, "I swear it was my dog out there, and it was hurt," and so just strange,
Yeah.
You wonder, you hear that, you run out there, your dog's sitting right there. And I know you're kind of in a remote location, too, so it's not like you can touch the neighbor's house next door and it was his dog,
Oh, no. Yeah. It's like, there's neighbors, but everybody owns like several acres. And, you can hear the dogs barking, but you can tell that it's from this location. And this was like, it sounded like it was actually just behind my house. Basically maybe just like 10 or 15 yards if I was to walk out in the woods.
Yeah.
So, and it was like really clear, it was like, I was like, there's no doubt that's my dog.
Well, I'd be careful while you're out there. I think if they were going to be completely aggressive with you, they would have done it by now.
Yeah, I started to kind of feel like that too. I think that at first there was a lot of activity. I think the only other thing, I guess it was maybe a couple weeks ago, my wife was out on the porch, and she came in, and she's not really scared. She's like, "Johnny, you got to come out here." She's like, "I don't know what it is, but there's two things. There has to be two of them." First thing I said, "Come in and lock the door." And I was like, explain to me, what happened. And she's like, "We have like a chicken coop." And she said it sounded like something around the chicken coop. But then again, I have a little patch of a wooded area right in our front of the house, past our lawn. And she's like, unless something ran through the darkness where I didn't see it, but now there's something that's in there and it's snapping limbs. A couple of days later after that, I went in there and I found like a tipi type structure, that in my eyes, I don't know exactly, how else it would be able to get there. And I showed a couple of my family members, and they're like, "Yeah, that looks strange. It's how can all these like limbs fall just like that and make a kind of like a blind, like a tipi, and in that area where you can get inside of it and sit down." And right there, when I was looking around, I was looking for some tracks and that kind of stuff. The only thing I really found was deer tracks, because it's all a lot of leaves, and you can tell it was deer tracks because the ground was wet and they kind of stick into the mud, The thing about it was also kind of weird is that there was a path. Well, there still is. There's a path that goes from our front lawn that goes kind of like through the little wooded area to the street. And I noticed that it was blocked off with some limbs had been placed there or had fallen from a tree by chance, but it's both the entrance and the exit. So when you walk through, it kind of looks like if you follow the path of the deer, It goes through, you pass that little that timpy type structure, a wooden structure. You come through, and then there's on both sides of the path, there's like a stick in the ground on both sides of the path with big limbs that kind of come off of it, and it kind of looks like a way that you could herd maybe some animals like through that, like it's only meant to either to enter or to exit from.
I wanted to ask you, why did your wife say there was two of them? What made her think there was two?
Just because the time frame, I guess, of the noise, she felt like it couldn't have. And plus, she was looking towards the direction of the chicken coop, and it's dark. You really can't see around there, but you can see the chicken coop. And she said it sounded like something was shaking it, and that got her attention. So she looked over there, and as she was looking, then she started hearing limbs breaking and snapping right in front of her in that little wooded area. So she was like,
"Oh, I gotcha.
It has to be like two of them, unless the one that was making the noise was able to run over to that quick, and also had to run through a way where she couldn't see it, like in the darkness, like where the light wasn't shining from our light that we have."
I gotcha.
Yeah, and in the back of our property in the wooded area, the wooded area, it connects to everyone else's property, so it's pretty large. And right where I saw the shadow type figure, dark figure, right next to it is another TP type structure with that somehow or another someone put up, and it's got all these like sticks that goes around, all these limbs that goes around, and it's the same kind of structure but taller. And it's the same thing. It's like it's structure where you can there's an opening, you can go in there and sit down in it.
My advice to you on this whole situation is just leave it alone. There's guys I would trust, especially down there in Texas, to come check it out. Probably tell you for sure if they're in the area or not.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's better not to press a situation like this, in my own opinion, but, what do I know?
Yeah, at first I was like, oh, I need to get someone here that that knows a little bit more about what to look for and let me know if they're around, But I think that once I kind of thought about it, I think kind of less I know, better off I'm kind of feeling. You know what I mean?
I gotcha.
And I thought about putting up maybe cameras or something around the area. Then I'm like, do I really want to see something, that will, I'm already kind of paranoid about it, or I'm not really paranoid, I'm just cautious, I make sure the dogs are in at night when it starts getting dark, and stuff like that,
No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I would definitely keep an eye on your dogs, but it depends on it's like Pandora's box.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really want to know what's on the property?
Yeah.
You already kind of got a glimpse of it.
Yeah.
And they're probably, the way you described the property to me with the creek drainage behind the house and all just the area where you're at. I know where you're at. I wasn't too far from there when I went out with the guys, so I know what's there. If there's not a lot of aggression and you don't want to really open Pandora's box, but if you want to know what's on the property and you want to, it sounds like you got a pretty good chance of actually seeing one. There's guys, I would have the big thicket guys come down there, big thicket watch, like Bob Carrot and those guys. Because they're going to respect your property. They're not going to show up with 30 people. They're not going to...
All right. A TV crew.
Yeah, they're just not going to make a mess of things. And sometimes if you're not getting aggression, but if you push it, you can get aggression.
Right. Yeah, I don't... Yeah, I was like, because I listened to some people, they say they live out, gifts and things like that, like apples or whatever. My wife is like, "Oh, should we do that? Kind of like a peace offering?" I was like, "No, because I don't want them to think that I'm trying to interact with them." It's like, right. I kind of feel like that they're a rare species, and I feel like, people know that they're there, whether the government's covering it up or people don't want to believe it, and I'm just going to share story with you real quick before we go, but like, what really got me really believing in Bigfoot was that whenever I grew up in northeast Louisiana in a rural area, and some of my family, my uncle and a couple of my cousins, they went on a camping trip to Arkansas, and they rented a cabin, and one of the nights that they were there, they saw something, what they thought was a person peeking through the window. So my uncle, my older cousin, they grabbed their guns and went out there, and it took off running, so they gave chase to it. And, of course, they didn't catch up to it, but they said they came back and they were telling us about the story, and they said that they believe it was Bigfoot because how fast it was running, and plus the limbs and the logs that it did step on. No way that a human could step on that and break it. So I kind of feel like, if with me seeing this stuff, seeing one recently, and then having a family member way back, this is probably the late 70s, sharing a story with me, I think, they're here, and I think there's probably more of them than what people really realize, because, honestly, it's like, if you're in Northern California, how often you go out and hike, you might see a bear, and there's, I'm sure there's, fair enough, bears, but,
No, I'm with you on it. I think I definitely wouldn't feed them. That's my own personal advice. Some guys you talk to say do that, but I look at it like this. Hey, if I thought there was a grizzly bear in the area, I sure as heck wouldn't be putting out food.
No.
And these things can rip you apart just as fast as a grizzly bear can.
Right.
But again, if they haven't really shown any aggression, it really depends on what you want. Now, if they start tapping on the house, start throwing stuff at the house, start showing aggressive behavior, that's a whole different story. Sometimes people just want to see these things. And like I said, I can get you in touch with the right people to probably make it to where you could see one if you wanted to see one.
No. I don't know if I kind of feel like I did see it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't aggressive towards me. I really haven't met none of my neighbors. We're not really that close to each other. But I kind of feel like, I wonder if they're like me, like, what was that? Or if they know they're here and they just leave them alone. And
I'm sure
one of the things, and one of the things that me and my wife talked about, if we should have like a researcher or someone come here and take a look around. She's like, do we really want that, someone here and disrupting the neighborhood? And, if they're here, they've been here for a while, and probably the people that lived here has probably been here for a while. So it's like, what we don't really want to draw like any attention to it, but then again, it's like, it is, if it is a hot area, the other side of it is, if there is a person that of that would be, discreet about it, I wouldn't mind, having them come. I don't know if I want to go with them. Well, with them, but I might, but if someone wanted, maybe they can get some information about them, maybe see one, or of course on vocalization, or, I really don't know if they actually live on the property or not, or if they just kind of like walk through.
Yeah, I'll put you in touch with some people, Johnny. I'll have them contact you. And then it's people I would trust to come out to my property if I had this going on, and have them take a look around. And, you might go talk to your neighbors. It may not be a bad idea to go up to your neighbors and say, hey, listen, have you guys ever seen, you don't have to say Bigfoot, but you can say, hey, have you guys seen anything strange out here? Or I know someone, it sounded like someone was walking my property, and I know the area you're at. You don't go on someone's property and start walking around at night unless you want to get shot.
No, you don't. No, you don't. And that's kind of the reason why I never really kind of went to any of my neighbors, because to get to their house, you have to drive down a long driveway, and, if they don't know you, it'd be kind of weird, like, And when I moved to this area, someone's like, oh, yeah, I know the area. People kind of tend to want to keep to themselves and stuff like that around here.
It's interesting, too, because I know where you're at. I know the general area where you're at. It's not far from where I went out with the guys down there when I went to Texas. It's really not that far away.
Yeah.
You know, as a crow flies, you're really close. But I would definitely be careful because they can be aggressive down in that area. But again, if you've been there for a year, you haven't had any problems.
We've been here for since March, so March like 3 months.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I know the house was empty for a while, wasn't it? Before.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, the people that lived here before have not lived here for a year.
I gotcha.
Before that, I guess they moved to a town kind of like south of here. So if they had work or something like that there, they'd have been too far to commute. So I don't know why they hold on to the house for so long. Maybe as a backup plan. I wasn't for sure if they're going to move back or not. But they took care of the property and and stuff like that. But yeah, they told me that no one's they hadn't lived in it for a year. So I thought that might have been another reason why too, maybe was kind of like having some sightings and stuff like that. And if they were hanging around here, they're not used to people and dogs being here, and maybe they're just kind of like checking it out. And I do go walking around in the back some, let my dogs run around and everything, and I kind of like sometimes I feel a little paranoid about doing it, but at the same time, it's kind of like I want to continue my life, and if I want to go explore back there, feel comfortable in doing it, it's it can be cool just kind of walking through the woods, but at the same time, it's kind of like I don't want to intrude and make myself kind of like feel like intrude on their territory or something like that, where they feel like they have to be aggressive.
Well, Johnny, I appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Hey, I appreciate it. It was nice talking to you.
It was nice talking to you too, Johnny. Next up on the show, I want to welcome Duke. And Duke, I'm laughing because of the music. I told Duke I was going to call this Duke's Conspiracy Corner. And Duke wanted to discuss some of the Insider episodes. I know a while back I had an Insider come forward, shared all of military records, all that good stuff. And then I did a show, and because of some threats and some things that happened, I took the show down. But I may end up actually bringing back that show. I still have it on file. And I thought about bringing it on just like a member-only type show on the website. If you go to SasquatchChronicles.com, you'll see all the member shows there on the right under the podcast section. I may end up actually releasing that full show down the road and just give it, let members listen to it. Because there was a lot of really interesting things during that show. Duke, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me back, and I'd like to say hello to all your fans out there. You got some of the best fans and listeners on Earth from what I can tell. I think you guys are really great.
Yeah, no, I have great fans, and thank you so much for being on. Well, I know you wanted to present some information, your take on the Insider shows. A lot of people like the Insider shows. A lot of people like the more darker, violent encounters. And I guess that's one thing I can address with that. As I talk to witnesses, I try and put together shows. What would I want to listen to? What type of shows would I want to listen to? And not every story is dark and deep, threatening, on the edge of dying type story. I have had a lot of those in the past, but not every story is that way. I know, like on Friday night's show, the gentleman I had on, I thought his encounter was fascinating. How he's literally within 20 feet or less of this thing and describing what he's seeing. And the creature didn't really do anything. It just stand there looking at him in shock and amazement as he was looking back at this thing. Every encounter to me is fascinating. And I know a lot of people, they wanted me to go more and more into the Insider show. And then I had to remove it because of some issues that happened. But Duke, I know you kind of had a take on it. I know a lot of people have been begging me to go back and talk about the Insider shows, and I just haven't had time. But what did you come across, and what did you think from that show?
Well, actually, I'll tell you, a lot of the stuff that the Insider mentioned were all things, just with very few exceptions, were all things that I'd actually heard before in other places, and some of which I was pretty much already prepared to say, yeah, that's probably true. But then other parts of it, of course, sound like so far out in left field. It's hard to get a real pulse on it. And I guess the other thing that even adds to that is that it sounds like the equivalent of what the physicists would call the grand unified field theory, only this one for conspiracy theories, where it ties all of them together, basically. So, either you've got a whole bunch of military insiders that have got some genius scriptwriter that's working on this stuff for them and telling them all to come, tell various people sort of different versions of the same information over and over again, or there actually is something going on and these people are coming forward to their own volition and sense of, needing to be forthright about information that's important and wanting to tell other people about it. And, some of it it's things that you could maybe see how something like that could come about, but it's still almost hard to believe that, some of this stuff could actually be real. So I was interested in doing this when you brought it up originally, Wes, just having, I know you're a real conspiracy hound too, and you're not just a Bigfoot guy. You like to look into all this other stuff too and learn what you can about it. And I've been that way for, a long, long time now. So I thought between the two of us, maybe we could give this, some of this information a sort of a little bit more thorough vetting and at least give the folks out there some idea of what we think might actually be going on, or some of the ideas that we could throw out so they could have something to think about on it.
Yeah, I think so. I am interested in these other topics. When I talk to some of the insiders, you're right. Some of the stuff sounds really crazy. And I know sometimes people will take little tidbits out of what I said in certain shows and blow it up into something that really wasn't. I think on the last show I made a comment about them weaponizing Sasquatch, or I've been told that's what they're doing. Some guy was basically called me a nut on there. And I was like, hey, man, I'm not saying they are weaponizing Sasquatch. I'm just giving you information I've been given. It's interesting, and I'll go into the Dulce, New Mexico thing, but I'll let you go down your list there.
Yeah, actually, what he's referring to is that I just went back and listened to the whole episode all over again and wrote down a list of different subjects that were mentioned in there so that we would not potentially miss anything that we should be talking about on your behalf. Well, I think we should start with where it starts, and that's with the whole Bigfoot thing. And one of the claims there was that there was actual gene splicing and manipulation going on with these creatures vis-a-vis the American military or some branch of it. And that they were basically trying to figure out how to weaponize these things, turn them into super soldiers. And obviously, if you think about it, an army of Bigfoots or an army of werewolves would be pretty effective in causing trouble for the enemy. But, on the other hand, how ethical is it to even create something like that to start with? And if these things already exist, then you're messing around with their genetic code and trying to make them into something that they're not and maybe shouldn't be made into. You don't know what the ramifications of that are. And, me and you have both talked about this before, Wes, with the weird stuff that they've been doing that the public knows about, like the goat spider thing, where the goat had the spider gene so that some spider silk would come out in its milk, which then could be extracted and used for whatever industrial purpose they wanted to apply it to. And if that sort of stuff has gotten to the point where it's open public knowledge and whatnot, you can only imagine what the DOD military that's, got to be a good 20 years ahead of what we're being allowed to know about, if not further, is capable of doing. And, basically, with the gigantic black bag budget that they've got, that they don't have to tell us what they're doing with it, they've got more than enough money to go ahead and start making monsters with this process if they wanted to. So is it possible? I really think it is possible. Did they, are they the originators of Bigfoot or some of these other creatures that we're seeing running around? I don't think so. I think that they are perhaps capturing some of these things and modifying them in whatever ways that they, find to be beneficial for what it is they want them to do later on. And I could really see how that could, be happening. But, these guys really should go read the Isle of Dr. Moreau before they start doing any more of this stuff, and see where these sort of weird experiments can take them. I mean, this is mad scientist territory as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with you. I think it is too. And I think that stuff is going on. And it's interesting. As I do this show, I've been thinking over the last couple of weeks, because I'm interested in all these other strange topics, to either expand Sasquatch Chronicles or to just do a second show based on this other stuff. because there's a lot of other weird things. You know, I get a lot of weird reports that really aren't Bigfoot related. And I've gotten really strange stuff. And when I talk to the person, you know, they seem pretty sane when I'm talking to them, but they'll say half man, half something else they ran into. You know, you kind of got to, is it misidentification? Was it something else? But as you talk to some of these people, man, you get weirder and weirder stories about things they're running into. And it kind of goes back to the insider stuff. I've been told on 3 occasions now, look into Dulce, New Mexico, or I think it's Dulce, New Mexico.
I think that's right, but I think the Americans around there pronounce it Dulce. I'm not sure. I'm not a native, but I've heard both. I think it is Dulce, though.
Well, and the weird part is going back to what you were just talking about with the gene splicing. I mean, all this seems like crazy in our own little worlds that we all live in and we reside on in our own reality. But some of this stuff, you know, I've been told some really weird stuff, and I came across this on the news. Duke, let me know what you think of this.
Dulce is a quiet, unassuming town nestled in northern New Mexico. Many of its residents are members of the Jicarilla Apache tribe. They swear.
I tell stories, but my nose isn't growing.
They are not making this up.
They threw down a ladder from that spaceship, and then 2 small people started climbing down.
Jerry Julian says she had her first extraterrestrial encounter right here on her Dulce ranch about 40 years ago.
It was huge. I just saw the bottom of it. You know, it was like flat like this.
Many of her neighbors claim similar strange sightings.
Fat in the middle and kind of like rounded on the sides. You're speechless, you know? You just don't know what to think, you know? It's just like, it's like nothing you've ever encountered before.
Why are stories of the extraordinary ordinary here?
I do not know. I do not know. Probably in front of that big mountain we have right there, you know.
Rumor has it there is a secret base hidden underneath the Archuleta Mesa here. The mountain overlooks Dulce. Some people in town say the base is run by aliens working with our federal government to conduct mind control and genetic experiments. Do you believe that?
Yeah. Well, a whole bunch of people seen it, you know.
Like the ground opened up, steam coming out of it.
They also claim they've seen some creatures cooked up in those experiments, like Bigfoot and something half-human.
Down this way, the waist down, it's a goat. It has a tail. But up here, it's a man.
People tell me Dulce wasn't always a center for supernatural activity, but then sometime in the 70s, things changed. That's when cows started turning up mutilated.
They just cut out in between the legs right here. We seen one.
I know it's not a predator it's doing it. There's someone's doing it.
Local police never definitively said who's to blame. Locals say it has to be something out of this world. And since then,
I was taking a random picture, zoomed it in, and there it was. There was a UFO right there.
They say they know it sounds crazy.
They're just going to ask me, well, how much did you drink or what did you drink?
I'll submit to a lie detector test or anything, you know.
But say it's the truth. Question is, do you believe?
Anything possible these days now.
In Dulce, Megan Cruz, KOAT Action.
That's exactly what we're talking about. It's Dr. Moreau territory there, doing weird genetic manipulation and trying to create hybrid chimeras using that sort of a technical process. And, you know, it's not ethical to create weird things like that just because you can.
Yeah, and so it makes you wonder what's going on. I know the residents down there in Dulce, they've been saying this for years. You know, I've gotten a lot of weird reports out of there, actually. Bigfoot and non-Bigfoot. Just some really strange reports. And a lot of the people I talk to in the military, I've been told that several times. Go look into Dulce, New Mexico. Go into that area. Just start investigating, start talking to people, and you'll uncover what's going on. And it just makes you wonder what's going on there. And anyway, I didn't mean to cut off your list there, Duke.
Oh, no problem, man. You know, it just gives me more time to think about what you're talking about, too. And one of the things that comes to mind when we're talking about Dulce is the whole story that surrounds Phil Schneider, who was involved in making, according to him, massive underground complexes, what generically known as DUMBs, deep underground military bases, supposedly for the military or perhaps the globalist elite to go and hide in if there's some big disaster on the surface, like a nuclear war, coronal mass ejection or whatever that would mess up the surface. But he claims that in the process of actually making that base there, if I remember right, that's where they were when they were drilling the pilot holes and ran into an underground complex that had supposedly already been there for, hundreds of years. The government actually knew it was there and didn't bother to tell him or any of the workmen or anybody about it, and just let him drill right into the damn thing, which resulted in a firefight that, according to Phil, he lost 3 of his fingers and was opened up like a fish from his belt all the way up to his neck, and would have died if a Special Forces guy hadn't thrown him onto the elevator and pressed the button to take him back up to the surface again. And, of course, Phil's been gone for quite a while now. After multiple assassination attempts, he finally did end up dying. But he was adamant right up to the last time he ever talked to the public or anyone else that this is all true. The government was making 2 or 3 of these deep underground military bases per year. And this lines up exactly with what the insider told us also, even the rate that they're being constructed at. And I have seen pictures of these big tunneling machines that they use. As a matter of fact, I was actually one of the people that was requested to be on a big tunnel job that was going in underneath St. Paul and Minneapolis. They were drilling a tunnel about 200 feet down to connect all of the old overflow tunnels to, so there was like a main spillway that would, in case the city flooded, would direct all the water away from it. And that was the kind of equipment that they were using. They just had this giant machine that would crawl in there and dig the tunnel right through rock, whatever was in front of it. And then they had, the more primitive version where they had to come in and then put a casement afterwards. But the ones that they're using supposedly for all this big deep underground military base construction are ones that can deflagrate the rock and then actually reform that into a smooth surface as the casement for the tunnel itself. So it's just like a huge earthworm. It just burrows through the earth and leaves this nice perfect round hole, 40, 50, 60 feet across. And the thing that got me when I saw a good picture of one of these is, why has this thing got a U.S. Air Force emblem on the side of it?
Right. I've seen that.
Makes you wonder, what are they doing, protecting our skies underground?
Yeah, well, it seems like anytime there's anything, well, for me at least, anytime there's anything weird going on with the military or with the government, for some reason it's always the Air Force. That's the one branch of government that keeps coming up when you look into things. And I don't know, honestly, I guess for the audience, I don't know if they are manipulating the genes of Sasquatch. There's something bigger going on. I'm not really sure on the cover-up. There's multiple reasons why they're covering this whole topic up, but why, I don't know. One of the things I was going to talk to you about, Duke, is down in Texas with the Big Thicket guys that were doing the expeditions. And I guess I won't go too much into the story, but from what I've been told from witnesses that were there, these guys, it was like almost just short of an FBI raid. These guys come rolling in from the forestry department and the USDA and all these different branches of the government to roll in to shut these guys down, and made a big stink, separated everyone, told the guys that were running the expedition they had to leave or they were going to take them to jail. Yeah, but everyone else could stay. They told the guys they had been surveillancing them for months, on and on and on and on.
God.
And this is conversation from the witnesses. These aren't even the guys. This isn't Bob or Tim or those guys telling me. This is what witnesses have relayed. So they're getting questioned left and right. They got to leave. One of the participants asked one of the forestry guys, have you ever seen a Sasquatch? And the guy's reply to him was, you don't want to know what I know about Sasquatch. And just kind of turned away. Well, he asked him again, and the guy basically came out and said, if you see one and it shows its teeth, leave as soon as you can. And then turn back around. I mean, just totally, it wasn't a joke. They weren't playing around.
Straight-faced, right? Good advice, though.
Very straight-faced, yeah. And what was interesting is, Bob, all those guys have to leave. I asked if they would send me copies of the tickets. And they got, it would be equivalent to like a parking ticket is basically what they got. It was like operating a business, in the national forest without a permit. Fine is what they got. And the max you can be fined for that is $150. So they've been surveillancing these guys for how long and using how much of taxpayers' dollars to go bust some guys looking for Bigfoot? It's like, are you freaking
How many man hours total to have a team doing this for that long? It's ridiculous.
To put it in perspective, if you walk, I think it's 100 yards away from an unattended fire, it's a $500 fine in the state of Texas. And the only reason why I bring that up, that's the fine right above. They give you the list of the statutes you broke, and that was kind of in that same category of walking away from an unattended fire. Except for that's a $500 fine. What these guys did was like a $150 fine, and they weren't actually. There was no amount written in, and no court dates, no nothing. I think they got the equivalent of like a backhand to stop doing their expeditions, and it makes you wonder why. Is there something going on down there that everyone needs to know about? Or, I mean, why go to the extent to kick these guys out of that area? It makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I thought about with that is here we go with the Miller document. But the Miller document did say that there was going to be in an area around there that they were going to be doing research on these things on, and like every 5 years or something, they were going to get another big parcel of land and attach it to it. And they had this long-term plan. It was supposed to be, 2012, last piece of land was going to be purchased or something. And, they'd have more space available for these creatures to live on. And it could be that, they're just sort of painfully aware of where these things actually came from and who's responsible for it. And so they're paying more attention to those than they would populations elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder. I mean, you would think that these guys would be more interested in busting poachers than busting these guys.
Yeah.
And when you hear them shut them down like that and kind of go at, I mean, there's way more to the story. And depending on how the feds handle it is depending on how much I'll do shows on it. But I'd love to have the guys on. The one thing that happened really strange is that when this last expedition, after the guys left, this mystery man shows up. He shows up with all this firewood. From what the witnesses, the participants told me was this guy stalked their fire all night long for them and said he was a local and said it helps keeps the boogers away or something to that effect as he's stoking the fire for him. And one of the guys asked him, "Are you with the military?" He's like, "This guy, there's something about this guy."
Mm-hmm.
But it's just weird, right? I mean, just...
Yeah, shows up out of the blue, you don't know him, and he's going to sit there and stoke your fire all night. Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Right.
Very.
And that was right after they kicked all the guys out. And it makes you wonder if they're like, well, let's send someone back to make sure at least a fire's going so don't wind up with a bunch of dead people. I mean,
yeah,
that's just kind of the stuff that I wonder about. Why did they... Anyway.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, you've got to look at this from the perspective of let's just look at it from the perspective of the public that are skeptics. They don't believe in Bigfoot. If there's no such thing as Bigfoot, why are these guys following these guys around for 4 months, surveilling them, so they can give them a $150 ticket? Really? Did they think they were smuggling drugs across the border through secret, 100-mile-long tunnels, and they had subterranean Bigfoots trained to carry them? Or, just like, what the hell were they actually thinking when they're after these guys? And what could be their motivation other than they know Bigfoot's real, and they just want to interfere with these guys to stop them from basically interfering with them?
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder.
One of the other things that was mentioned that, first of all, we're being desensitized to having weird critters around by the vampires, the werewolves, the zombies, the alien shows, all that sort of stuff is an attempt by the government propaganda machine to desensitize us to having weird critters around. And that was about the same point in the conversation where Chris mentioned that Chris at least thought that Dogman is 100% created by genetic manipulation.
Sometimes people argue that with me. They say the reports of the Dogman go back as long as Sasquatch, if not longer. In my mind, you think of a Dogman, I don't know. It just doesn't seem right. Something about it doesn't seem right. And I tend to agree. I think it is something that's been genetically altered. I mean, that's my own personal opinion. I could be 100% wrong. when you start listening to what the witnesses say they ran into, something's not right about that. I mean, it's just not.
There's some element of it that either says it's a supernatural construct or it's a genetically manipulated construct. Because from what we understand of the rules of science and nature, and, correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction here on this, Wes, something like that should not be able to arise through normal course of evolution. Right. What's the advantage to running on hind legs when you can already run fast on four legs? It doesn't make good sense logically that something like that would ever come into existence. And then there's the folks that'll tell you that the way the body on a regular wolf or something, or a dog, any canid is laid out, makes it difficult for them to actually breathe and whatnot if they're standing in an upright position. And so it would tend to, again, point away from something like this happening as a result of natural selection or environmental pressures or anything like that. So you're sort of left with, were these things around a long time ago? Well, I found references to them going back thousands of years, the cyanocephalus of the Greeks. The Greeks had lots of legendary monsters and stuff, but what do we know where they came from? There might have been somebody making these things genetically back then. That wasn't us. So, when we look at what we can do with our technology now, and we look at some of the critters that they had, quote unquote, imagined, it really makes you wonder about the whole thing. But to me, I've always had trouble picturing Dogman as an ordinary flesh and blood animal, and it was always easier for me to think of it as either being something that was genetically created or something that was basically had a basis in the supernatural. I was talking to a native from the Navajo tribe yesterday, and we got on the subject, and what they perceive to be a dogman by our standards, which is to say something that looks like a werewolf, has hocks like a dog, has big dog-like feet, not Bigfoot feet. It doesn't have front paws. It's got hands with claws on them, but so it sort of looks like a werewolf. Now, from their standpoint, that isn't a natural creature. It's a skinwalker. And I said, okay, well, I showed him a couple more pictures, and one of them was a gugwe, and he said, well, that's a dogman too. And I said, well, that's the one with the Bigfoot-type body on it. So you guys think those are supernaturally created too? And he goes, well, we sort of class all those creatures as being supernatural. And then he told me the exact word for it. And I said, well, how does that translate? We kind of talked back and forth a little bit. And the closest thing to it was basically the Navajo analog for the word cryptid. So anything that isn't a normal animal that you see regularly falls into the category of going underneath this one word, which doesn't necessarily mean it has magical powers. It just means it's so rare and weird that they consider it to be something unusual. So, there's that whole thing to consider. And a lot of the tribes do have names for Dogman and separate names for some of these other things that we're starting to think are sub-varieties. But the one thing they all have in common is these things are vicious. And not to be trusted. If you see one, you should probably, if you got a big enough gun, you think you can shoot it, you might maybe want to. They just have a totally nasty reputation, and I've never heard of one of them having any kind of a positive interaction with humans. I'm not saying that they can't, but usually it's that they just love to scare the hell out of humans, whether they're planning on attacking them or not. And the Gugwees, by comparison, can be actually sort of neutral or disinterested in humans. There was one guy who was walking his dogs back here, and I think it was like 2012, and ran into one that was like 9 or 10 feet tall, and it was just walking across this trail that he was walking his dogs on, and just kind of stopped for a second, looked at him, no show of alarm or interest or anything, and just turned back and kept walking, like, I don't even care that you're there, and disappeared in the woods on the other side of the trail. So that's one way you can probably tell the Gugwees a little bit easier from the Dogman, is that they're not 100% hostile, but they haven't got much better reputation, so don't let that encourage you to go and pull their non-existent tail. Might be a really bad idea. But what do you think about that?
I think it's interesting that when you asked him, how does that translate? And it basically translated like cryptid. I think that's interesting. It's, this whole thing, that's why I try not to delve too much into the insider shows, because some of the information I think for the audience to hear is just so far out left field, or it seems like it is anyway. You start talking about DNA experiments gone wrong. You start talking about weaponizing. You start talking... And I think all of this is going on. I really do. I really think let me clarify it. Do I think that's the only reason why Bigfoot's being covered up? No. But I think with regard to some of this other stuff, when someone tells me, hey, I ran into a half man, half weird thing, I'm kind of more apt nowadays to stop and listen to see what they have to say.
Right. Well, with you, Wes, if you're looking at this person face to face, you've had enough experience with us that, within 3 minutes you can tell if they're feeding you a line of hooey or if they actually are serious or not. You can usually tell just by what their demeanor is like when they're telling the story. If this is something weird and shocking and otherworldly, their face will show it. There's, it's not that difficult to tell. And then you get stuck with a situation like, well, this guy's telling me something that's just so hard to believe. I don't know where to go with it. But on the other hand, he's so earnest and he seems so honest about it. And clearly he saw something that scared the living hell out of him. So what do I make of this story?
Yeah, and that's what I try and do. That's why I thought about doing like one night a week, weird stories, kind of just weird, off the wall. I'm not sure yet. Figure a way to put that into the show. Because I get a lot of them, man. I get a lot of like really weird type stories from sane people. I mean, people that aren't nuts, that are saying, hey, I ran into this and it freaked me out and I'm not sure what to do with it. So I thought about, hey, why not we should do another show, Duke, where we just do weird stuff. You know what I mean?
Hey, I'm down for it. If you want to do it, brother, I'd be happy to be there. I love all this kind of stuff. I've been, since my encounter happened when I was so little, I've sort of been stuck doing this ever since because of just sheerly not trusting that what they're telling me is accurate. I want to look into everything all the time and vet it myself and see if it actually is. And, that's kind of a good way to find out things that you shouldn't know and get yourself in trouble. But occasionally it's helpful.
Well, do you want to add anything else to it, or?
Well, the only thing that I wish that we had gotten more of from the insider when we were talking to him was more physical detail on these things, and we got some interesting things that, where are the best, spots if one of them's attacking you and you've got to defend yourself, where are the best spots to shoot at it, and that, they basically have very closely set together ribs that are tremendously thick. And the sternum itself is tremendously thick, even more so than it needs to be. So if you're shooting at the upper chest or something, chances are that unless you're hitting them with a 50 cal or something, it might not go in anyway. And then there's other strange things about their anatomy that didn't get touched on that I've heard from other people too, though, where it's, like one variety has like two hearts and they're sort of under its armpits on each side. So if you shoot it where you think its heart is, that's not where it is. And some varieties having 3 vocal cords, which essentially allows them to make noises that basically no other animal could make. And if you want to look at it this way, they could do a 3-part harmony all by themselves. So, if that's true, that could explain some of the really odd sounds that they can make. And, even things like Bear on the Bigfoot Outlaws talking about the train would be coming to this intersection that because it was a crossroads there, every time it went by the intersection, it had to blow the horn. It's by law. And these things would feel the ground rumbling, or they would hear it coming off in the distance, and they'd start mimicking the train, the horns of the train before it even got there and actually blew. And, how weird would that be to hear that coming down from the hills next to the train track? What the hell is up there making that noise, But I think that might have some validity, and it could be one of the reasons why they're so good at mimicking and, being able to make themselves sound like other animals.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things when I was at that expedition with the Olympic Project, they had a lady there that does something with monkeys. She goes to the Amazon. She was talking about how they had actually trained a chimpanzee to talk. She said it could only say 4 words, and when it talked, it sounded like a deaf person, but they breathe differently than we do. So every time the monkey would try and say something, it had to push a lot of air out. But the chimpanzee learned 4 words and could say the 4 words. I think it was like mom, dad, and stop, and something else. And the chimpanzee learned this. And so, these things having the vocal cords, I've had enough witnesses on now, and I've heard enough encounter stories, even off the air, where I firmly believe that they can mimic you. It may not be perfect, but they will try to parrot what you say and the noises that they hear. One of the stories that the insider told me, and I'll let you tell it, Duke, when the insider was telling me the story, Chris actually started crying in the middle of telling me the story about shooting the family of Sasquatches. Yep. I think Chris was more upset about the reason why they shot him. But do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, I can't give some details on it, but suffice to say it was in the far north, and what was happening is that these things were not predating on humans or scavenging off us or anything. The only thing that they were doing wrong is that they were being seen too often. They weren't afraid of people very much anymore because people didn't harm them, so they were letting people start to see them, which was, presents a problem for those that want to keep this whole thing covered up. So they sent in a hit team basically to go and get rid of this little troop, and they had already shot the I think if I remember right, it was 2 younger ones and the male, and had wounded the female, and she was kneeling on the ground over one of the dead infants, basically crying over it just like a human mother would, with tears coming down her face and everything. And of course, Chris could see this through the sniper scope, and for whatever reason, well, pretty obvious what the reasons are, but really hurt him bad, and he basically broke down at that point too. And you're pulling down on something that's essentially innocent, doesn't deserve to be shot, and it's crying like a human being. Well, how would you feel about that? Unless you were just a cold-blooded murderer, you wouldn't feel very good about it. And the thing that really gets me about this whole situation is it was so needless. These things weren't hurting anyone. The only thing they were doing wrong was letting people see them, and that's grounds for them to be assassinated. It just makes me sick.
It is kind of heartbreaking to hear the story. Like I said, Chris actually broke down in tears as Chris was telling the story about killing this group. But, that's not the first time I've heard that. I talked with a guy one time that claimed to have shot them, or shot one, with a small caliber. I think it was a 9mm. It's a longer story than this, but basically the short version is he shoots it. He said, they cry like we do. You know that, right? And the first time I heard that, I said, what? He goes, yeah, they cry like we do. The Sasquatch-type creatures, they'll cry like we do. And then he kind of told me the whole story about shooting this one, and it put its hands over its eyes and actually started crying, and then it ran off. And he said that he had to pack up and leave really quick because he was starting to get rocks thrown at him. He felt like retaliated on. He said the forest just opened up with noise after he shot that one. He started getting rocks thrown at him. He started getting logs thrown at him. Just enough time to basically grab a sleeping bag and run. Again, going back to what Chris was saying, that's not the first time I've heard of one crying.
Yeah, that's just really sad. I mean, it adds a whole nother level of misery to the story. Just like the story isn't bad enough already, but then there's the added element of, well, they cry just like human beings, So really, really sad. I've actually seen a drawing that Chris made of the picture. Chris drew a drawing of the female Sasquatch crying, and it's really sad.
Yeah. Well, Duke, thanks for coming on for Duke's Conspiracy Corner. We'll have to do this again next week, but I appreciate you touching on some of the insider stuff, because people ask me questions all the time, and it's nothing I can prove. It's just stuff I've been told by higher-ups, and I've heard it several times over. So maybe it doesn't faze me as much as when I go on the air and talk about it. But thank you for doing that, Duke.
Oh, you're totally welcome. I enjoy doing this sort of stuff, and I always enjoy talking with you, Wes. And if we can bring information like this to people, don't necessarily assume that we think it's true. We just think it's interesting, and that there's enough substance to it that you guys might want to see it or hear about it, and you might think it's interesting too.
Absolutely. And catch Duke on World Bigfoot Radio on YouTube. Check him out. And I try and post your shows. But if people go out there, subscribe to Duke, and that way you get the alert when a new show pops up. World Bigfoot Radio. Duke, thanks again.
You're very welcome, Wes. Thanks for having me on again, brother.
Thanks, Duke. I don't know why that music makes me laugh. But anyway, Yeah, remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Bye for now. I will see you guys next time. Have a good night, everyone.